Well, hello everyone, and welcome to this MACP Rheumatology Clinical Interest Group webinar. We've done this in a bit of a rush because we want to make sure you all have as much information as possible and certainly as much enthusiasm as possible for the BSR Future Leaders course that we're going to be previewing today on the webinar. We think will be about 20 minutes, and we do hope you find this useful. I'm going to pop out and hand over to Hannah as our chair and certainly the co-chair of the Clinical Interest Group at this point, who will introduce what we're going to talk through on this session.
Thank you, Will, and welcome everybody. Thank you for taking the time out to join us today. And thank you to our speakers as well. I will formally introduce them shortly, but I just wanted to mention to everybody about the MACP website and how really we want to highlight the benefits that you can gain through becoming an associate member or even a full member. So please do look at the MACP website for further information, or do contact us. And also further information will be coming out in our upcoming newsletter, which will be coming out at the beginning of June, which will always cover the MACP stuff, but also the upcoming webinars that will be coming up. So this is the second in the series that we've got planned. There will be four, so you'll find out a bit more information on those ones coming up shortly. So today's webinar is on leadership. So we're joined by David Pilbury and Dermot Ferguson. I will cover a little bit about their background shortly, but just to give you a bit of a background on why we're running this webinar today. It really comes about through the BSR. They launched a Future Leaders Programme. So this is in partnership with the whole Ashridge Education. And it's really about trying to tackle the bigger problem that we have with the workforce in crisis. You'll have all seen the report that came out with the BSR. So through that, the BSR are funding 18 members for this year-long course, and we'll find out a little bit more about that with our speakers today. But it's really been driven by that report, and it's about highlighting how we can address the needs and try and use the current workforce that we have, where we have a huge amount of skills within the AHPs, where we can actually look at extending people's roles and making enhanced roles for AHPs to try and tackle this bigger problem. So looking at our first, moving on to our first speaker today, we've got David Pilbury. He's the director of MSK Services, and he's an MSK champion from Versus Arthritis as well. So he was in one of the previous cohorts. So he will be talking a little bit about the experience he had of the course, and hopefully provide you with some of the top tips that will be able to encourage you to maybe join the MSK champions as well. And then we will have a little bit of chat with Dan Ferguson as well. He's got a huge background in physiotherapy, currently the clinical lead in the North of England with the low back pain programme, and representative of the National Back Pain Pathway. But he will talk a little bit more about from a rheumatology perspective and how that fits in with primary care. But really, we're trying to focus on the MSK versus arthritis champions part today. So Dave, thank you very much for joining us. If you could give us a little bit of background about your experience, and we'll go from there, I think.
Thanks very much, Hannah. So my background, my clinical background is as a rheumatology physio, and I'm based at Oldham in Greater Manchester. But Versus Arthritis advertised for a leadership programme. And I think, like all physiotherapists who fall into leadership, the formal training and other things that you get around leadership is quite limited, and you sort of fall into place because you prove you're pretty good at one thing and you get moved into something else, and you have to almost learn on the job, and we often learn from mistakes, don't we? So when the opportunity came around, my director at the time felt it was a really good opportunity not to miss. So Versus Arthritis advertised for a cohort of champions, and it was a 15-day course spread out over 2 years at Ashridge. Now, for those of you that don't know, Ashridge is a National Trust property. It's set in the massive grounds of beautiful woodland, but the old house is something not dissimilar to Hogwarts. And it almost feels like that when you go, you move into a little bit of a bubble. You notice very briefly that the Wi-Fi signal and your phone signal disappears just as you get close to the property. And from the moment that you walk into Ashridge, it feels very special. In our cohort of champions, it was predominantly physiotherapists and some rheumatology staff in there as well. And there were 14 champions, so GPs, rheumatology staff, physiotherapists, and it's a very disarming, very wonderful place to learn how to be a leader and improve yourself, not only as a leader in your working environment, but as a sort of life skills as well. My bit of feedback that I had, my interview for the Versus Arthritis Champions Programme was not going well. I think it's fair to say in the first half of my interview, where it felt quite mechanical, almost like a normal work interview. And I think they were seeking several things that I wasn't giving them in the interview. And it wasn't until I held my hands up and said, I'm very new to leadership and I have no idea what I'm doing quite a lot of the time. It's more of a wing and a prayer. And they talked about what my aims and aspirations were for the Champions Programme, what I aim to do in my work career. And almost all of it focuses around patient focus. For those of you that know me, most of my work is spent doing shared decision making and patient choice, and on the NICE programme, the personalised care programme, and Aqua that I teach with in the Northwest. And it wasn't until I sort of held my hands up and acknowledged my vulnerabilities, which is my tip number one for everyone, is they really don't want people who feel like they're established, fully formed leaders. When they're delving into the interviews, they want people who acknowledge the fact that they're not the finished article, have areas where they need to improve. And in cohort one, we had really experienced physiotherapists, national icons, people like Ruth Sefton, and in Dermot's case, Dermot, and Kay Stevenson, and others. So there are people in each cohort that you look up to and feel these were the people I looked up to when I started in my career. I was on the other end of the spectrum where I was new and very vulnerable, and you get this imposter syndrome when you join, and they take you through a journey of discovering what your own style is, what the style of others are around it, and how you incorporate that and get the most out of each other. The champions, I'm in touch with 6 or 7 of them of the 14, most weeks, certainly most months, and I can call upon them at any point in time to help and support. It might be something like, what do we do with the injection process in COVID times? What do we do with this? What do we do with that? So there are bits of information that come out of it. How do we access health inequality information, health literate resources? There are some things that seem only small, but essentially when you reach out to each other, the information's there straight away. And I think that's the key thing. The programme gets you to use each other for the benefit of the patients that we serve and the services that we provide. And it's really important that the cohort is formed in a way that not everybody is the same. So when you apply, then you go for interview, they will be looking for certain things to make the group work and the group dynamics work, that you can enhance and develop each other. And that is something that has changed me as a leader and changed my perspective on lots of things, including home life as well. I'm going to hand over to Dermot now, and I'll let him take the reins there. And then if there's any questions to ask, by all means, we'll field them.
Thanks, Benedict. So firstly, thanks to the MACP to invite me along today. I saw the message on Twitter to say that this was out, and I said I must really support this, because I've done quite a few courses over the years, and this has been a life-changing course and given me some focus on what's important to my patients, but also to myself. The things that I learned about it was initially about myself, that you can't lead others if you don't know who you are yourself, and to know what you're good at and not good at. And I think, as David said there, that's one of the key components of this course, is to understand more about you, so that you can help others develop themselves, and as a team develop that network that David described. The learning points from it, I think the imposter syndrome was one of the big things. We all sat in this room on the first day and realized, how did we get in this room? How did this happen? That I'm sitting in this Henry VIII's hunting lodge in beautiful surroundings, with Holt Education, who typically do executive leadership training for world-leading companies, and how did they pick me? That's probably a whole different discussion, but the thing with it is that I think the reason you get chosen for this is that you're open to learn, are open to understand that you're not the finished article. And I think that anybody that is successful in getting to interview stage, you're obviously good enough to be there. What they're really looking for, I think, as David said, is that potential to develop, that potential to have leaders who will communicate across rheumatology for the future, and across different departments, professions, and regions. And I think, as David would say, that when they're picking the candidates, that will come to mind. Myself, I think the same as David. We now have a joint cohort. We try and meet as regularly as we can. And if we look at leaders in sort of MSK, physiotherapy, and rheumatology, we kind of say, oh, they've been to Astridge too. So that network has been there, and we're all quite happy to sort of to share it. I think if I was to give advice on the interview, I spoke to my wife the day before the interview and basically said, what do I need to work on? What are the important things? Not what am I brilliant at, but actually what are my key things to focus on that a leadership program would change? One of those was timekeeping. And the other one, anyway, so I'm still working on that. Yes, so but that's good goal. But I think it is just to be, when you go for this interview, to be honest. They really want to help and really want to develop you as an individual and as a professional, so that they can change the future of the patients that you see in the future. Right, I'll hand back to Hannah there just to see if there's any questions that we can answer.
Thank you very much. It's very informative, but could we go back a little bit, to go back a step? Obviously, we've discussed about the program and how we get to this interview stage, but where do people start from here? How do they find out the information? Where do they go to first of all? And that could be to either of you.
Well, I suppose I'm the best one to answer that, Dermot. But in terms of, you can go onto the BSR website and follow the links there to the application. The application is part of the process that they'll look at. Certainly from cohort 1 of the versus arthritis group, was very GP and rheumatology and physio heavy. So in Dermot's cohort 2, there's certainly podiatry represented, nursing represented. And I think when you look at the cohort, don't exclude yourself based on the application. Look at it and think, what can I offer? And how can I develop? And I think they will be looking for a mixture of professionals, and it would be great to have physiotherapy represented on that for definite. So following the BSR website, you can follow those links, get the application, think about your application, put some thought into it, because I know obviously these things matter, and this is an opportunity that is unbelievable and once in a lifetime, and I think it's really important that you dedicate a little bit of time to that, even if you're overwhelmingly busy as things are at the moment.
So I think there's still be some people saying, you know, is it for me? Would I be ready for it? Do I feel too junior? You've clearly got to be ready to take on that commitment, but also, you know, be prepared to look at yourself and look at developing yourself, which, you know, can be a daunting process, can't it? So obviously we don't want to have highly experienced people that are already in, you know, real high leadership roles, but I mean, how junior do you think people could be? You know, you get some lone working physios, people who are in very different, you have very different levels of support. What's your feeling on that?
Well, from an Ashridge perspective, they'll be looking at people who've got interesting ideas as well. So in Derma's cohort, and certainly our cohort, there are some individuals who are innovators. There are some educators in university settings that effectively are introducing rheumatology education into nursing degrees. There's somebody who works in a school over in Norfolk Way, and effectively, if you think about the spheres of influence, they won't be looking at people who can just put national things into place, but even local things, and then share that information, share that learning that you develop, and the good stories to develop services elsewhere. Certainly within the Champions programme, there's some national projects that have come out of it that you will be aware of. Almost certainly things like the Let's Move with Leon and the exercise videos on the Versus Arthritis website for each joint. The MSK decision support tools are all on there, and Good Boost, which is exercise in swimming pools dotted around the country, with waterproof iPads helping guide patients through exercise regimes. So the projects that come out of the programme are only a small part of it. They're not designed for us to be successful project-wise, but to develop individuals. And I think the youngest member in our cohort is 32. The oldest member was in their 60s. Age is not important, and experience isn't important, in the sense of one or two of them had practiced for a couple of years before joining the cohort. So it's more about your willingness to develop, and the areas that you want to develop in, and what difference you want to make to patients rather than true experience. And I would encourage a raft of people to apply rather than everybody at the same level.
And do you think if you're working in a department, you know, with consultants, with nurses, etc., that you need them on board, or is this something you can go ahead with independently?
Dermot?
I think having the support of the team is going to be useful, because obviously it's 15 days, so you will need guidance on that. So yeah, and as a team, that whole team will benefit from that, the change that you'll be able to make through the leadership skills and training that they offer, but also the networks that are developed there. That link that group will then have will pay dividends in the future. Just to reinforce what David was saying there, I think it was our second meeting, because obviously in our application we had to put forward a project and what did we think we're going to work on, what was important to us, and then life got in the way, lots of other stuff came up, and we became quite disappointed that maybe the projects weren't going to get finished in the time. And I say Versus Arthritis and the team in Ashridge were really good and said, no, remember the focus here, the project is you. The project is to develop leaders for the future, to not just do this project, but actually develop better care for patients and society in the future.
It sounds a fantastic opportunity, as you say. It's developing yourself. It's great for networking and looking at projects for the future. And I'm assuming because they're looking at trying to create a cohort that has a good mix of individuals, if people are rejected and they were to run another one, I'm assuming you would encourage them to reapply because it may be different the second time around.
I would do. I think the important thing when the Ashridge interview is like no other interview I've ever had, because it goes. There was an educational psychologist and an occupational psychologist on the interview panel, so they're looking at the dynamics of the group and how they would work and interact and how you enhance each other's ability. So when one of the exercises might be the Myers-Briggs work on working out what type of an individual you are, they won't want people from the same group. They want different people that supplement each other, starters, finishers, innovators, all of those things. I mean, we, as an illustration of development, and going back to Dermot's point of being supported by the organisation that you're going to, we were CQC'd 2.5 months ago, and we got outstanding on well led, and I'm fairly certain that wouldn't have happened without the help and support of Ashridge, because it does develop you as a leader and encourage you to develop others around you, which makes a massive difference. And I think that's what I would say to you is, if you're not successful in application 1, is don't be disheartened at all. And in actual fact, I think if your application was identical the second time round, but the mix is what they want for the second time round, there may not be anything that you need to change as an individual to make that more successful, other than to just say to you, be honest and vulnerable, show your vulnerability, show your willingness to learn, develop, be honest, and actually acknowledge where things go well and where things don't go so well, because that is the tipping point at my interview of where things started going right, was when I stopped pretending that was great at lots of things.
Very good advice. I'm just wary of the time, so just want to check if there's any other questions from Will or Carol before we wrap up.
Thank you both of you. It's just really inspiring to hear about your experiences, and also what really supportive information that you're helping to provide about the application. I just wondered whether you might both just very briefly give an example of what you might have done in an aspect of leadership now compared to what you did before, just a real practical thing, you know, what something what it shaped differently from then to now.
I'll come in there, David. Probably the simplest thing is to recognize that everybody's human, and that leader who is the chief consultant and does this, he actually, or she actually, is just the same as you day to day, and probably has a very similar journey. I think prior to the doing the training, I would have hummed and hawed over multiple forms of emails and how am I going to get in touch and how am I going to do that. And now I'm probably just a bit more forthcoming and say, hello, I believe you have some knowledge of this. Could you help me in that? And actually, it's great. People are really, really forthcoming with help if asked nicely. And I think as professionals, as especially as physios, we carry a great deal of imposter syndrome in these situations of how do we get in to do these things. But actually that there's other people in the room and they're all thinking exactly the same. So I think that was probably one of the biggest changes for me. So I'm now much more easy and relaxed about stuff than I would have been in the past. Are you anything on that, David?
I think that's a really good point to make. I think people generally do things for people. And I think the Champions Programme, linking everything together, you can learn some things that are in development way ahead of time and put them into place in your own place of work to try and help with innovative ideas. But the whole point of the programme is to support each other in your own avenues. And just being confident enough to open up the door and say, I am Dave, because you realise that actually breaks a lot of barriers down. And if you're wanting to put innovative ideas or put development in place, people will often be more supportive if they know who you are. And it's having that confidence to go in and say, I am Dave, we've not got the solutions to all these problems, but if you could help do this, this will be brilliant.
That's lovely. Thank you. It's really inspiring to hear about the difference that it's made. Thank you.
Anything else from Carol or Will? So yeah, I'd just like to thank you both very much for joining us today. So it's been really informative, and I think it's given a lot of our members a lot to think about, and it's nice to know that they have this opportunity. We want to be able to create good leaders, or more confident leaders. You're getting a lot of confidence out of having attended this course, haven't you? So it's a really good time for rheumatology and physiotherapy, all of therapies, of how we can make changes and try and move things forward. So thank you very much for helping us out today.
Thanks, man. Yeah,
no problem.
Apply today.
Yeah.
Yeah, my advice would be the process of applying is really worth doing. Apply today.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.